This is the Morningstar MC6 Pro, one of, if not the most powerful MIDI foot controller out there, and in today's video I'm gonna show you what it can do, how I'm using it, and why you might have to get one in future. Let's do it.
You know who it is.
So in case you don't know what you can do with these controllers, basically what you can do is you can set up each of these buttons to do different things when you press it. But not only when you press it, you can configure it to do a different thing when you press it, or when you hold it, or even on the press and on the release as well. So it will send a different message when you're pressing it down, and then send another message when you're lifting it up. But not only can it send one message when you're pressing down, but you could send up to 32 different messages per preset. So per knob, you can set up to 32 different MIDI messages. These can be note messages, MIDI CC values, program change messages. Basically anything you can do with MIDI, you can set to be triggered by these buttons here, or by these switches. So yes, up to 32 messages per preset. A preset is whatever you put on this one stomp switch, and this can be divided between the different types of presses. So between the short press, long press, release, long release, or double tap. You can make any kind of combinations of these and send out whatever MIDI messages you want. And as you can see, there are 6 different stomp switches here, which means we can save 6 presets, and that means 6 times 32 MIDI CC messages. But that isn't all. Yes, there are 6 stomp switches, but you can switch between different banks of presets. So if I press these together, I'm going down one bank, and that means I have access to 6 more presets. And altogether there are 127 banks of presets. So 127 times 6, and that times 32. There's a whole lot you can do with this pedal, and you can send all of these messages out to whichever gear you like. Speaking of which, these up to 32 MIDI messages per preset or per stomp switch don't all have to go out to the same MIDI channel. Some of them can go out to MIDI channel number 4, others go to MIDI channel number 1, any kind of combination you like. It's super flexible. And with that, I think it makes sense to look at the ins and the outs to see how we can send out these messages. Most of the connections can be found on the back of the unit. We've got a MIDI input, a MIDI output, which can also function as a MIDI through port. We've got the power supply input, which is not necessary for me right now because I've got it hooked up to the computer with the USB-C cable. So that means it's getting power from the computer. And this USB port allows me to edit the device from the computer. Next up, we've got the USB host port, which is really interesting because the MC6 Pro can function as a USB host. That means you can hook up a USB port to this and connect up to 3 USB MIDI devices, and they can all be controlled from the MC6 Pro. Super useful and thoughtful feature. And next up, we've got the 4 Omni ports right here, which can serve different purposes. As the name Omni ports implies, they can be TRS MIDI outputs with which you can, for example, control other pedals that have a TRS MIDI input. They can be TRS expression pedal inputs, which means you can hook different expression pedals up to this device and then, for example, convert these expression pedal messages into MIDI CC messages. Let's say, for example, you want to move the Octatracks slider left and right with an expression pedal. That's something you could easily do with this device. And the last function is you can use these as a TRS aux switch input as well. And finally, we've got the 2 relay ports. I've never used any device with a relay port, but if you have, you probably know how useful this is. Actually, my bad, this isn't it yet, because on the side here we've got the 1/8 inch MIDI TRS input as well as the output, and I think this makes this such a great complete package because we basically have every type of MIDI connector that we possibly could want in such a device in a really small form factor. We've got the 1/8 inch, we've got the DIN connectors, we've got USB, and even a 1/4 inch TRS MIDI adapter. Really, really nice in order to interface with any device you could possibly want it to interface with. In my experience, setting things up with MIDI can oftentimes be a real hassle and really complicated, and that's something that the people at Morningstar made very easy, because I think their editor is super clearly laid out and it has so much functionality, yet it is relatively easy to use, I would say. And one function I find particularly clever I want to point out is the MIDI dictionary. And what they have done here is they have taken so many of existing music devices out there and cataloged all of their MIDI CC parameters with the value that they correlate to. So for example, if we want to affect something in the Access Virus TI, we can select that device and now it shows us all the different parameters that we can affect with MIDI CCs. We can either copy this value so we don't have to remember what it is. Then go to our preset and say, when I press a button, paste in this value, and now it will affect the value that we have selected before. But you can also do it more easily. Now that I've selected the device already, the Access Virus TI, I can say if I press a button, set up control change messages, and now I click MIDI dictionary and it shows me the Octa track, which I've already favorited before, and the Access Virus TI. And now I can select from any of the parameters that I can influence, and I don't even have to know what MIDI CC message it corresponds to. I just select the parameter I want to affect, filter mode for example, and it shows me CC number 51 and I can apply it. So super easy, and I think it's such a smart feature to implement that, and there are many, many devices in that list that you can choose from that are already mapped in this way. Alright, now let's actually have a look at a few use cases. In this case, I'm using the MC6 Pro with my Octa track. The Octa track is functioning as a free running looper where the loops have no defined loop length. That means I'm recording into a recording buffer and then merely playing back that recording buffer with a flex track. But what's special here is that I'm actually not using the sequencer at all. All I'm doing here is I'm using the foot switch to record from the Octa track's input A and B. So as I am pressing down, it will start recording. As I am releasing, it will stop the recording and immediately play back that recording buffer using the track triggers here. So it will also trigger the playback at the same time. So it starts on press down, on release, it stops recording and starts playing. So I'm going to do this by playing a keyboard here, just play a few notes. And as you can see, it immediately starts playing. Now what I can do is I can also switch tracks on the Octa track. Of course, normally I would do this with my foot, but I got it on the table for easier demonstration. So I switch tracks and do the same thing here. And these loops have different lengths now, because I'm only recording for as long as I'm holding them down. So I can turn the Octa track into a simple free running looper using this MIDI pedal. Let's play the Nord drum on the other input on a different track. And I could also record all sources at once or the internal recording source. All of these things are possible. I can switch freely through the tracks and also re-record over one of them. And that's the cool thing about this pedal, I think, is that you can set up other devices in a way you wish they worked, and really add a lot of functionality to your existing devices. In this case, I added some really cool functionality to the Nord Drum 3P, which on its own doesn't have a hi-hat pedal input. And that means I can't easily switch between open hi-hat and closed hi-hat. The Morningstar MC6 Pro, however, allows me to easily do that by manipulating some of the CC parameters on my hi-hat channel. So what I'm doing is I'm changing the decay time of the noise as well as of the tone, and that allows me to not only create open hi-hats, but with the click of this switch here, also closed hi-hats. And not only can you change the hi-hat with this trigger right here, but if you have an existing hi-hat pedal that you have maybe with another electronic drum kit, you could hook it up to the omniports and control the Nord Drum's hi-hat in that way. And of course, this allows you to play the Nord Drum a lot more like a real drum kit, and not only can you switch between open and closed hi-hat with the click of this switch here, but if you have an existing electronic drum kit with a hi-hat pedal, you could theoretically connect that to the omniports of the MC6 Pro and then use that to play it as a hi-hat pedal into the Nord Drum. So there's so much flexibility with this setup. I think it's really cool. And on top of that, you could of course hook up another pedal and play the kick drum of the Nord Drum as well if you wanted to do so. And as you probably saw, if I press this, it goes from open to closed and it changes the message. There are all kinds of interesting things that you can do in order to reflect whichever state you are currently in. So you can toggle through different states, you can go back from one to another, and all kinds of customization. It really is incredible how much you can do with this thing and make it look the way you want it to look and make it reflect whatever you are changing with these presets or these switches. And if you are used to using guitar pedals, you probably know how to tap the tempo by foot. That's something we can do on here as well, and then send the clock out into other MIDI devices. So let's play this and tap a different tempo. And we can easily change the tempo. So this could be the master clock of your setup, and whenever you feel like changing the tempo, just tap it. And you can also start and stop, let's say, your DAW or all your other gear. Press stop. And of course, there are probably a million other ways of using and configuring this device. It's a highly versatile MIDI utility that I think can be at home in anyone's studio, not just for pedal board enthusiasts, since it can also control your synthesizers, your samplers, or your DAW. Whatever has MIDI, this thing can control it, so when you got your hands full, your feet are still there to click some switches. And of course, if you want to learn any more about this device, check out Morningstar's YouTube page. They have great tutorials explaining everything in detail. And with that being said, thank you very much for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would appreciate a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to ring the bell. Hope to see you in the next one. Peace.